Hi, in this video, I'll cover the last couple story arcs in the Apocalypse Triptych, which actually had 3 stories in them, and then I'll cover a couple other story arcs that only had 2 stories in them. These are the books of John Joseph Adams's Apocalypse Triptych. They have stories from before the apocalypse, during the apocalypse, and after the apocalypse. David Wellington wrote the first arc, and I'm calling it the Brain Disease arc. This one starts off with a story called Agent Unknown. A Center for Disease Control and Prevention employee named Whitman travels to Philadelphia to help the police with a situation that they've called him about. There have been incidents with extremely violent people who can no longer speak, and the police have one cornered in what sounds kind of like a crack house when you read the story, the way it's described. There's quite a bit of action in this story, and it sets up the coming apocalypse fairly well. Whatever turns the people violent hasn't been discovered yet at the beginning of the story, but it's not spreading very quickly like some other doom plague scenarios. There's a scene in this one where Whitman and his boss, a doctor named Phillips, discuss the ethics of euthanizing an actual live human being with the disease just so they can figure out what the disease is a little bit faster. The question is it really ethical to sacrifice one patient that's definitely not coming back from the illness in order to save countless other potential victims? It's still a human being, even if it's never going to recover. The two viewpoints, Whitman and Phillips, are interesting because they have the same goal but approach the problem with slightly different attitudes. This one gets a 7 out of 10 from me. It's a strong story that sets up the next one pretty well. The second story in this arc is called Agent Isolated. Now Whitman is stuck in New York City and the apocalypse is in full swing. There's a group of people with him that have a de facto leader named Angie, who was a nurse. Whitman is trying to get that group of people to Brighton Beach, where Angie insists that boats are waiting to get people away from the city. Along the way, they have to avoid roving packs of zombies and soldiers that are trying to stop them from getting there. This is another action-packed story in this arc. There's a definite tension in every scene in this one. Even when they aren't being chased by zombies or soldiers, there's still some tension in it. The end dangles a carrot in front of the reader before a brutal twist snatches it away, then a brutal admission about the entire situation comes forth. For me, this story was a class above Jonathan Mayberry's Sunset Hollow story that I reviewed in part 4 of this series. I'm rating this one a 9 out of 10 because the tension permeated every scene of the entire story, and the ending was really good. The final story in this arc is called Agent Neutralized. Whitman is still kicking in this one. He's trying to get a couple people to a settlement camp for survivors, but they're being chased by a motorcycle gang a la Mad Max. This plot is interwoven with flashbacks of Whitman in a government bunker where he's on trial for the plague that has killed most of mankind. I agreed that it would be just like the government to look for someone to blame when things went wrong, which is part of this story. That aspect is similar to Shannon Maguire's story Resistance that I reviewed in part 4 of this series. This story gives the reader a lot of action in the road sequences and a lot of drama and tension in the flashbacks. The story itself goes by pretty quickly, and I'm rating it an 8 out of 10. It's an entertaining story, especially if you're a fan of Mad Max and the Road Warrior. This brain disease arc ticked a lot of boxes for me. The characters were deep enough to be interesting, the action was detailed and intense, the scenes had plenty of suspense in them, and the entire thing was written without a lot of fluff. I'm rating this arc an 8 out of 10 overall. It doesn't surprise me that these were so good. I've read David Wellington's Monster Trilogy, and it was excellent. Book 2, Monster Nation, gave me recurring dreams of being chased through the Colorado foothills by zombies until I hid in a wooden bunker underground. It was really strange. When I was reading that book, I had to space out my reading more to stop the dreams. It was good stuff. The next story arc is the final one with 3 stories in these books, and it was written by Sarah Langan. I'll call this one Bunkers and Bots. The first 2 stories in this arc are presented as artifacts in a far future history museum. The first story is called Love Perverts for some reason. The looming apocalypse in this arc is an asteroid that's going to basically end civilization. Some people's families have gotten tickets to underground bunkers so they could ride out the asteroid impact and the ensuing environmental catastrophe. Tom is a gay kid whose parents left him behind and took his sister to a bunker 600 miles south of the town that they lived in. When Tom realizes that a local teacher has a bunker ticket, he decides he's got to get that ticket. I thought this story started off a little rough. There's some decadent party discussion in the beginning interactions between Tom and his friend Julie, aka Jules. One thing I thought was odd was that the kids are still going to school 2 days before the impact. Why would anyone do that? It didn't make sense to me, though the story does make it sound like there's a loose form of martial law in the town. Maybe that forced the kids to be in school even though the world was about to end. I don't really know. I'm rating this one a 7 out of 10. The story gets better as it progresses, and the end is sad, and the reader finds out what crappy people Tom's parents truly were. The next story is titled Black Monday. This one follows a group of military scientists trying to transplant a human brain into a robotic body. Why, you ask? Because something has to perform maintenance and repairs on the bunkers that the humans are hiding in to escape the apocalypse. When a general runs rampant and messes up their work, they have to figure out what to do next. The viewpoint character in this one is the scientific team's leader, and her name's Nicole. Her descriptions and motivations are a little scattered and confusing at first. At times, I felt like they jumped a little too much and left the reader to fill in too many gaps. This story gives an exact date for the apocalypse as 1/14/31, which, based on tech level, I'm guessing is 14 January 2031. One thing is mentioned in the first part of the story that seems almost like a throwaway comment or statement, but then it comes back at the end of the story and provides some extra impact and meaning to the story's dark ending. I'm rating this one a 7 out of 10. I wanted to rate it higher because of the ending, but the confusion of the beginning brought its overall rating down for me. The final story in this arc is called Prototype. The nameless protagonist is at his isolated lab somewhere near Lake Mead. He's been called back to the home base to present the new suit that he's developed for the people to withstand the harsh, sandy environment outside. When the sand ship arrives, the protagonist and his dog get on the ship and the journey begins. The protagonist goes through some stuff for his dog, which, as an animal lover myself, I thought was admirable. He has to deal with the sand ship driver who doesn't really like dogs. The weather kicks up a storm as they leave his lab, and that creates some other problems. The story's only about 10 pages long, and I can't say too much without giving the plot away. I'm giving this one a 9 out of 10. I didn't see the end coming, but once I knew it, I realized the earlier clues that Sarah Langan had put into the story, and they were really, really good. It was a good ending. The overall rating I'd give to the Bunkers and Bots story arc is an 8 out of 10. The second story's subtle implication is carried through into the third story, and the Twilight Zone ending of the third story brought the entire dark future home for me. I really enjoyed the overall story arc. The next arc is only 2 stories long, and it's by Desirina Boscovich, and I'm going to call it the Alien Rapture arc. The first story is called Heaven is a Place on Planet X. Aliens have arrived and told the people of Earth that lasers in orbit will destroy Earth at a certain time. They also say everyone's consciousness will manifest itself on planet Zerxiconia at the same moment that the Earth is destroyed. The catch? They tell everyone to go about their business as usual and forbid them from doing all the last minute things that people might do when they know the world's going to end. To enforce this rule, they draft one out of every 1,000 people to be an enforcer that will use an alien supplied ray gun to disintegrate anyone that does anything out of the ordinary. This ranges from suddenly quitting a job to backpack through the mountains, to calling old friends that they haven't talked to in years, or wanting to go skydiving. Anything that you normally wouldn't do could qualify you for getting disintegrated, basically. The viewpoint character in this story is someone that was chosen to enforce the aliens' rule. It's an interesting apocalypse scenario. Would people believe the aliens? Would they ignore the rules? What does it say about the ones that do ignore the rules? How should the enforcers feel about their jobs? What if they have to enforce the rule on a family member themselves? The story handles some of these questions, and I'd rate this story an 8 out of 10 for the unique apocalypse. There are a lot of interesting ways it could go and a lot of other story possibilities in this one, so I really liked this one. The second story is called To Wrestle Not Against Flesh and Blood. This story focuses on a woman named Annette. Her mother was enforced out of existence, basically disintegrated, and now chaos is happening outside, and soldiers are in town to prevent it. Annette's father is leading a group of men that plan on rebelling against the entire situation. During it all, Annette is getting supplies and running the household and making sure everyone is fed and that the kids running around are cared for. The story has a couple lightly sketched overtones of religious reactions to this apocalypse. There's also a sense of growing abandonment within Annette because of how her father is acting. She tries to close the gap with an act of betrayal against someone that she barely knows at one point in the story, and it's kind of interesting. However, I'd only rate this one a 5 out of 10. I didn't really like the story all that much. It's readable, I just didn't really care for it that much. The characters were kind of bland and the action was slow. The aliens are mentioned and impact the plot a little, but it's a more personal story that just didn't really appeal to me all that much. It's kind of tough to grade the Alien Rapture arc since it was only 2 stories. I found the first story really interesting and full of possibility, while the second kind of bored me. I'd rate the arc a 6 out of 10 overall because the gap between my enjoyment of the 2 stories was just too big. The next story arc, which I'll call the Fever arc, is by Elizabeth Bear. The first story is called You've Never Seen Everything. The capital F fever is caused by a mutated form of a couple viruses that manage to jump from animals to humans. It's killed enough people that the only thing on the roads anymore is people walking from place to place and military vehicles. The first person narrator is writing a journal to her husband as she tries to get from Denver to San Diego on foot. The journey has a couple incidents, including the narrator's experience with the plague and some other people that are dealing with the plague. Most of Elizabeth Bear's writing is pretty good, and this one is no exception. The main character wants to get home no matter what, even if it means dealing with sick people or getting sick herself and overcoming it. She even crosses the desert on foot. I'd rate this one a 6 out of 10. I thought the plot was a little generic with minimal tension. At one point, it did feel like Bear wanted to expand the story by a few pages, but she either chose not to or editorial request kept that section's action at a distance and minimally described. The next story in this is called Margin of Survival. A girl named Yana is on the hunt for food near the coast. She's found a place where some people live, but she knows better than to just approach them and ask for food. Instead, she has to sneak into their storage buildings after darkness falls and get out undetected. This story was kind of so-so, and I'm rating it a 5 out of 10. The main character's sneaking around has a little bit of a dungeon crawl feel to it. However, wondering if she'll be spotted is the only real tension in the story. Even though Yana needs to get back to her sister as quickly as possible, she's so careful about her actions that it doesn't feel like like she's even pressed for time at all. The Fever arc was an okay read. I'd rate it a 5 out of 10 overall. Again, hard to judge anything with just 2 stories, but both of those stories weren't anything that would make you say, I want to read more about this world. So that's the last of the connected stories in John Joseph Adams's Apocalypse Triptych. You can see all the other connected arcs in the other videos in this series. There are also 9 standalone stories spread across the anthologies, and I'll cover those in another video. If you want to comment on these stories or any other apocalyptic fiction, please put it in the comments. If you like this content, hit the like button and subscribe so that I know I'm doing something right. And bye for now.